When Marcus Reaper Kane carried Elena Rodriguez from the blood-stained cellar of his newly purchased ruin, her unconscious body trembling against his leather jacket, he knew his carefully planned isolation was over forever. The president of the Nevada Hells Angels had bought the crumbling Victorian house to disappear from a world that demanded too much responsibility. Too many impossible decisions, too many brothers' lives weighing on his conscience. But as he climbed those rotting stairs with a kidnapped woman in his arms, something fundamental shifted in the darkness of his soul, something that felt dangerously close to redemption. The house had been his escape route from 20 years of violence. After 2 decades of running the most feared motorcycle club in the Southwest, Marcus needed silence that came without the rumble of Harley engines, without brothers depending on his word to live or die, without rival gangs plotting his destruction. He'd paid cash for the decrepit 3-story Victorian outside Carson City, a monument to someone else's shattered dreams that nobody else wanted. Perfect for a man trying to forget who he used to be. The realtor had been a nervous woman in her 50s, constantly checking her phone and glancing at the boarded windows like she expected something to come crawling out. "You need to understand the history, Mr. Kane. The Ashford family built this place in 1887. 3 generations lived here until they vanished in 1995. Police found signs of struggle in the cellar, but no bodies. The investigation went cold. Locals say the house is cursed." Marcus had laughed, a sound without humor that echoed off the peeling wallpaper and warped floorboards. "Lady, I don't believe in curses. I believe in cash, chrome, and keeping a loaded .45 within arm's reach. But now, carrying this broken woman toward his truck, while something dark and hungry seemed to watch from the shadowed windows above, Marcus Kane wondered if he should have listened to those whispers about curses, because this felt like destiny, dark and inevitable as the Nevada desert wind that howled through the gaps in the Victorians' rotting bones. If you love forbidden love stories, subscribe and don't miss the next one. The house stood like a Gothic nightmare against the Sierra Nevada foothills, its ornate gingerbread trim rotting away in strips that hung like dead skin. Once grand turrets sagged toward collapse, their windows either boarded up or reflecting nothing but emptiness. The wraparound porch tilted at angles that defied physics, supported by pillars that looked ready to surrender to gravity at any moment. Victorian elegance had become a monument to decay, beautiful in the way that only ruins could be beautiful. Marcus had planned to gut the interior and rebuild it into something clean and simple, a place where he could work on engines without interruption, drink beer without watching for federal surveillance, and sleep without dreaming about the brothers he'd failed to protect. No more church meetings where he decided who lived and who disappeared. No more looking over his shoulder for DEA agents or rival clubs seeking revenge for old wounds. Just a broken man and a broken house, healing together in the middle of nowhere. The property included 12 acres of overgrown gardens where roses had gone feral and apple trees dropped fruit that fed only the ravens. A carriage house leaned against an ancient oak tree whose branches scraped the 2nd-story windows when the wind picked up. The whole place reeked of abandonment and secrets, of lives interrupted so suddenly that coffee cups still sat on tables and children's toys gathered dust in rooms where no children would ever play again. He'd bought it sight unseen from a bank that wanted it gone more than they wanted fair market value. The price had been almost insultingly low, even for a house that violated half the building codes in Nevada. But Marcus Kane had learned to recognize opportunity in other people's disasters. He'd built his reputation on taking broken things, bikes, men, situations, and making them work again. The Ashford family had been prosperous once, according to the Historical Society records he'd found in the Carson City Library. William Ashford had made his fortune in silver mining, built this house as a testament to his success, filled it with a wife and 3 children who smiled in photographs that still hung crooked on the dining room walls. But prosperity in Nevada had always been fragile, built on luck and determination in equal measure. By 1995, the family had been reduced to shadows of their former glory. The silver mines had played out decades earlier. William Ashford's grandson, Thomas, had struggled to maintain the property on a mechanic's salary, trying to preserve a monument to wealth with a working man's paycheck. The night they vanished, Thomas, his wife Catherine, and their teenage son Michael, neighbors reported hearing sounds of distress that stopped abruptly at midnight. Police found evidence of struggle in the cellar, signs of violence, but no bodies, no witnesses, no explanation that satisfied anyone. The official report blamed a home invasion gone wrong, but locals whispered about darker possibilities, about things that hunted in the old mining tunnels that honeycombed the hills, about debts that could only be paid in desperation and fear. Marcus had thrown away the newspaper clippings and police reports without reading them completely. He didn't need other people's nightmares. He had plenty of his own. But carrying Elena Rodriguez's unconscious form toward his truck, her injuries evidence of systematic cruelty, Marcus Kane realized that some nightmares couldn't be thrown away. Some nightmares waited in cellars for 28 years, patient as predators, hungry as the desert itself. And some nightmares wore the face of salvation, arriving broken and bleeding in the arms of men who thought they were beyond redemption. The crying started on Marcus's third night in the Victorian house, drifting up from the cellar like smoke from a fire that had been burning for 28 years. He'd spent the day installing new locks on every door and window, his paranoia honed by 2 decades of survival in a world where enemies could be anyone: rival gangs, federal agents, disgruntled club members looking to advance their position through betrayal. The house's original locks had been ornate Victorian brass that looked impressive, but couldn't stop a determined teenager, much less someone serious about causing harm. Marcus had been sitting in the gutted kitchen, nursing his 4th beer and making lists of everything that needed fixing, when the sound reached him. At first he thought it was wind in the walls. Old houses made strange noises, and this one had been empty long enough to develop its own acoustic personality. But wind didn't whisper words, and wind didn't sob with the particular desperation of someone who'd lost all hope of rescue. Please, please, someone help me. I just want to go home. Marcus's hand moved instinctively to the Glock tucked in his waistband. 20 years of midnight raids and surprise attacks had taught him that voices, where no voices should be usually meant, someone was planning to make his evening significantly more complicated. He moved through the house like smoke, his motorcycle boots silent on floors that creaked under the weight of ordinary men. The cellar door stood open at the end of a hallway, lined with family portraits. Generations of Ashfords watching with eyes that seemed to track his movement through frames thick with dust. He was certain he'd secured that door earlier. Certain he'd checked every room in the house for squatters or addicts looking for a place to sleep off their chemical adventures. But certainty was a luxury Marcus Kane couldn't afford. The wooden steps groaned under his weight as he descended into darkness that smelled like earth and rust and something else. Something organic that had been festering for far too long. The cellar was older than the house above it, carved from Sierra Nevada bedrock by men who'd believed their fortunes would last forever. Stone walls sweated moisture despite the desert climate outside, and the temperature dropped 15 degrees between the first step and the last. His flashlight beam revealed a space that belonged in a medieval castle, not a Nevada farmhouse. Thick stone pillars supported the floor above. Iron rings had been mortared into the walls at shoulder height, restraints that predated modern sensibilities by several decades. The floor was modern concrete, but it had been poured over something older and more disturbing. And there, secured to one of those iron rings with modern zip ties, was Elena Rodriguez. At first glance, she looked like she'd been there for days rather than hours. Her elementary school teacher clothes, a cheerful yellow blouse and navy skirt, were torn and stained. Dark hair fell across her face like a curtain designed to hide evidence of systematic intimidation. When Marcus knelt beside her, he could see restraint marks around her wrists and signs of rough treatment that made his jaw tighten with controlled anger. But she was alive, breathing, and when her eyes opened to focus on his face, Marcus saw something he hadn't expected to see in this place of ancient tragedy and modern cruelty. Hope. Are you real? She whispered, her voice raw from calling for help that no one had been meant to hear. Real enough. Marcus's voice came out gentler than he'd intended. What's your name? Elena Rodriguez. She tried to sit up straighter and winced as movement pulled at injuries Marcus couldn't see. Are you with them? I'm the guy who bought this house 3 days ago. Marcus worked at her restraints with tools from his jacket, trying not to think about how recently someone had used this cellar for its intended purpose. Who did this to you? 2 men. They grabbed me outside my school yesterday evening. Said they were taking me somewhere safe until... Elena's voice faded as memory caught up with present circumstances. Until what? Marcus had her restraints loose now, but he could see that moving her was going to require care. Elena Rodriguez had been held captive with the methodical patience of someone who wanted her afraid but undamaged. Whoever had secured her in this cellar had been waiting for something specific. What do you do? Your job, I mean. I teach 5th grade at Carson Elementary. Elena struggled to stand and had to lean against Marcus's shoulder for support. Those men kept asking about someone named Kane. They said he was coming, and when he did... She looked up at Marcus with sudden understanding. That's you, isn't it? Marcus Kane, president of the Nevada Hells Angels, the man who'd bought the Ashford house to escape his reputation, only to discover that some reputations followed you no matter how far you ran. Yeah, that's me. They said you'd come for me. They said men like you always try to save people even when saving them gets you hurt. Men like me don't usually save anyone. Marcus slipped an arm around Elena's waist, supporting her weight as they moved toward the stairs. We're usually the thing people need saving from. But you're saving me. Still working on that part. They'd reached the kitchen when Marcus heard the motorcycles. Multiple engines, moving fast, coming up his private road with the purposeful urgency of men who'd been summoned to business. Through the window, he could count headlights, at least 6 bikes, maybe more, forming up in his front yard like cavalry preparing for a charge. But these weren't his brothers. The engine notes were wrong, the formation too loose, the approach too obvious for Hell's Angels conducting club business. These were men who wanted to be seen coming, who wanted their targets to have time to understand what was about to happen. The Diablos had found him. Get down, Marcus ordered, guiding Elena behind the kitchen island that had probably been elegant once, before time and neglect turned marble countertops into abstract art. Stay quiet no matter what you hear. What's happening? Company. Marcus checked his weapon and moved to the window. The kind that doesn't announce themselves politely. The lead rider was Victor Viper Delacroix, recognizable even with his helmet on. Marcus had been hunting the Diablos president for 5 years, ever since Victor had made the mistake of targeting Hell's Angels territory in a turf war that left good men injured and Marcus's reputation threatened. Tonight, it looked like Victor had decided to deliver his next message personally. Kane! Victor's voice carried clearly across the desert air. We know you're in there. We know you found our present. Their present. Elena Rodriguez, elementary school teacher, kidnap victim, bait in a trap that Marcus had walked into with his eyes wide open and his guard fatally down. Send out the girl and we'll make this simple, Victor continued. Keep her and we'll make things complicated. Marcus looked back at Elena, who was crouched behind the kitchen island with her arms wrapped around her knees. She should have been terrified. Any reasonable person would have been begging him to return her to the men who'd held her captive in his cellar. Instead, she was watching him with those dark eyes, waiting to see what kind of man he really was. There's a root cellar off the pantry, Marcus said quietly. Stone walls, separate from the main foundation. Get in there and don't come out until I call for you. What are you going to do? Marcus Kane smiled, and for the first time in months, it was the expression that had made him president of the Nevada Hells Angels. Something I should have done 5 years ago. Outside, Victor Delacroix was done talking. Marcus heard the distinctive sound of weapons being prepared, of men spreading out to surround a target, of confrontation being organized with military precision. He'd bought this house to escape conflict. But conflict, it seemed, had followed him home. The irony wasn't lost on him. Trying to save an innocent woman had put them both in more danger than if he'd simply walked away. But Marcus Kane hadn't survived 20 years as an outlaw by making the safe choices. And something about Elena Rodriguez made him want to be the kind of man who chose salvation over safety, even when salvation came with a price that might be higher than either of them could afford to pay. The Hells Angels arrived like thunder rolling across the desert, their Harleys announcing brotherhood long before Marcus could see their faces through the Victorians' broken windows. He recognized the lead bike's distinctive exhaust note. Danny Ghost Mitchell, his lieutenant, the kind of man who appeared when needed and vanished when the work was done. Marcus could see the rest of the formation through his kitchen window. Spider, Bones, Diesel, and Crow. His inner circle, the men who'd followed him through federal investigations and territory wars, who'd bled with him and trusted his judgment, even when that judgment led them into impossible situations. They'd come without being called, drawn by instincts honed through decades of brotherhood. "Stay in the root cellar," Marcus told Elena, checking his .45. "Whatever happens up here, don't come out unless you hear my voice calling for you." She grabbed his wrist as he turned away. Her fingers barely circled his forearm, but her grip carried surprising strength for someone who'd spent hours restrained in a cellar. "Are they here for me?" "No." Marcus met her eyes, seeing worry there, but also something else, determination. This woman had backbone. "They're here for me. Will they help us?" "They're my brothers. They'll help because I asked them to." The engines cut off in unison, and Marcus heard boots on his rotting porch. He opened the front door before they could announce themselves, knowing that protocol mattered with men like these. Show weakness, and they'd question your leadership. Show strength, and they'd follow you anywhere. Reaper. Danny pulled off his helmet, revealing the scar that ran from his left temple to his jawline, a souvenir from a knife fight in Bakersfield 3 years ago. "Heard you bought yourself a retirement home." "Danny, boys." Marcus stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind him. 4 other Hells Angels flanked Danny, younger men with hungry eyes and quick loyalty, the kind of brothers who joined the club for the family and stayed for the purpose. Little late for a social visit. Club business doesn't keep normal hours. Danny's expression carried the weight of bad news. "Got word you've been avoiding church meetings. Brothers are starting to wonder if you've forgotten your responsibilities." "I'm taking some time." "Time." Danny's laugh held no humor. "You're the president of the Nevada chapter, Reaper. You don't get to take time. You took an oath, same as all of us. Brotherhood until death. Club before everything else." Marcus felt the familiar weight of leadership settling on his shoulders like armor he'd tried to remove. These men had followed him through federal raids and territory disputes. They'd trusted him with their lives, their freedom, their loyalty. They'd given him everything brothers could give, and in return he'd given them purpose and protection, and a family that would never abandon them. But tonight, for the first time in 20 years, Marcus Kane didn't want to be their leader. "Whatever this is about can wait until morning." "Can't wait." Danny stepped closer, and Marcus could smell motor oil and cigarettes and the particular intensity of men who lived on the edge of violence. "We got problems with the Diablos. They hit one of our supply runs last night, took everything. Word is they're planning something bigger." The Diablos. Marcus's oldest rivals, the reason he had more enemies than allies in Nevada. For 5 years they'd been testing boundaries, probing for weakness, waiting for the Nevada Hells Angels to show vulnerability. If they were escalating, consequences would follow as surely as sunrise. "How many did we lose?" 3 hurt. Rico's in intensive care, touch and go. Danny's voice hardened with the particular anger that came from losing family. "This ain't the time to disappear, Reaper. The boys need their president. They need to know you're still the man who built this chapter into something that matters. From inside the house came a soft sound. Something shifting in the kitchen. Maybe a door closing quietly. Danny's eyes sharpened with predatory focus. You got company? Nobody important. But Danny was already reading the signs. The defensive way Marcus held himself. The slight positioning that blocked access to the door. The micro-expressions that 20 years of friendship had taught him to interpret. Since when do you keep secrets from your brothers? Danny's voice carried across the porch like a challenge. Since when do you put civilians before club business? The implication hit Marcus like a physical blow. Not because it was wrong. He'd heard similar accusations before. But because somewhere in the last 6 hours, Elena Rodriguez had become something more than a stranger he'd rescued. She'd become something worth protecting, worth choosing over the brotherhood that had defined his adult life. Watch your assumptions, Danny. Or what? You gonna forget I've been covering your back for 15 years? Danny pushed closer, close enough that Marcus could see the disappointment in his eyes. You gonna forget who you really are? Who he really was? Marcus Kane, president of the Nevada Hells Angels. A man who'd earned respect through loyalty and hard decisions. A man who didn't walk away from fights or hide behind farmhouse doors when his brothers needed leadership. But when he looked through the window and saw Elena's shadow moving carefully through his kitchen, Marcus realized something fundamental had changed. For 20 years, he'd been a weapon. Sharp, reliable, necessary. Tonight, he wanted to be something else. He wanted to be the kind of man who deserved the way Elena had looked at him when he carried her from that cellar. I'll be at church tomorrow night, Marcus said finally. We'll deal with the Diablos then. Danny studied his face for a long moment, reading 20 years of shared history in Marcus's expression. You better be, Reaper, because if you're not, the boys might start wondering if their president has forgotten what brotherhood means. And when brothers start questioning loyalty, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. They both knew what happened to Hell's Angels who put anything before the club. The desert outside Carson City was full of cautionary tales about men who'd forgotten their priorities. Danny and his men mounted their bikes and roared into the darkness, leaving Marcus alone with the weight of choices that would define the rest of his life. When he turned back to the house, Elena was standing in the doorway, her face pale but determined. I heard what he said. Her voice was soft but steady. About putting civilians before club business. You shouldn't have been listening. Maybe not. Elena stepped onto the porch, close enough that he could smell her shampoo. Something clean and innocent that had no place in his world of motor oil and violence. But I'm glad I did. Why? She reached up and touched the Hells Angels patch on his jacket, her fingers tracing the Death's Head logo that had defined him for 2 decades. Most people flinched away from that patch, understanding instinctively that it represented something dangerous and uncompromising. Elena touched it, like she was trying to understand what it meant to him. Because now I know what kind of man you really are. You have no idea what kind of man I am. You're wrong. Elena's dark eyes met his without flinching. You're the kind of man who carries wounded strangers from dark places. You're the kind of man who stands between his people and the things that would hurt them, even when standing up costs you everything. I've done things that would change how you see me, Elena. Things that would make you run if you knew the details. I know you're not perfect. I know your world isn't mine. Her hand moved from his patch to his cheek, and Marcus's breath caught. But tonight, in that cellar, you were exactly who I needed you to be. The simplicity of it made him smile. A real expression, not the calculated intimidation he usually wore. Hell's Angels don't usually get called heroes. Maybe not. Elena's thumb traced the scar that ran from his ear to his jaw, a souvenir from a chain fight in Reno 8 years ago. But sometimes they save people anyway. Marcus caught her wrist gently, his calloused fingers wrapping around bones that felt delicate as bird wings. The men who took you will come back. I know. And my brothers expect me to choose the club over everything else. Always. I know that too. So what are we doing here, Elena? She stepped closer, until her body was almost touching his, until he could feel the heat radiating from her skin. I don't know. But for the first time since I woke up in that cellar, I'm not afraid. Marcus Kane had faced federal agents and rival gangs. He'd negotiated treaties and declared wars, had made decisions that determined who succeeded and who failed. But looking into Elena Rodriguez's trusting eyes, he felt something he hadn't experienced in 20 years. He felt like a man worth saving. The moment stretched between them, full of possibilities and dangers in equal measure. Marcus could see his future splitting into two paths. The familiar one that led back to his brothers and the brotherhood that had sustained him for 2 decades, and the unknown one that led towards something he'd never allowed himself to want. A chance to be better than what he was. A chance to choose love over loyalty, hope over habit. A chance to discover if Marcus Kane could exist without the armor of his Hells Angels presidency. Looking into Elena's eyes, Marcus realized that for the first time in his adult life, he wanted to find out. Elena discovered who Marcus Kane really was at 3 a.m. when his phone rang with news that would shatter everything. She'd been sleeping restlessly on his couch, her body still aching from the cellar ordeal, startling awake every time the old Victorian creaked or the wind rattled windows like ghostly fingers. Marcus had insisted she take his bed, but Elena couldn't bear the thought of displacing him further. He'd already sacrificed his anonymity for her. She could see it in the way he'd looked at his brothers, the weight of leadership he'd tried to abandon settling back on his shoulders like familiar armor. The phone's harsh ring cut through the pre-dawn silence. Marcus answered on the second ring, his voice immediately alert with the hyper-awareness of a man who'd learned that middle-of-the-night calls usually meant crisis. Yeah. Elena watched from the couch as his face changed. Whatever news came through that phone drained the color from his features and turned his eyes into something cold and distant. She'd seen glimpses of the intensity in him, the way he moved, the automatic way his hand went to his weapon, the casual authority in his voice when he gave orders. But this was different. This was Marcus Kane, the Hells Angels president, and Elena suddenly understood the difference between a man who'd survived violence and a man who'd mastered it. When? A pause that stretched like a held breath. How bad? Another pause, longer this time, filled with the weight of calculating consequences. No, nobody moves without my word. I'll be there in an hour. He hung up and stood motionless for a long moment, staring at the phone like it held answers to questions he didn't want to ask. What happened? Elena sat up, pulling Marcus's flannel shirt, the one he'd given her to replace her torn blouse, closer around her shoulders. The Diablos hit our clubhouse, burned it down. Marcus's voice carried no emotion, but Elena could see the rage building behind his eyes like storm clouds on the horizon. Rico Santos didn't make it out. Elena didn't know Rico Santos, but she could see what his loss meant to Marcus. Another brother gone. Another debt that demanded payment in kind. In Marcus's world, debts like that never went unpaid. I'm sorry. Are you? Marcus turned to face her, and Elena saw something dangerous in his expression, something that reminded her that this man had built his reputation on being more ruthless than his enemies. You know what this means? It means you have to go. It means I have to choose. Marcus moved to the kitchen table where his gun belt lay coiled like a sleeping snake. 20 years I've been president of the Nevada Hells Angels. 20 years I've put the club before everything else. Before sleep, before safety, before any chance at a normal life. My brothers are in danger, and I'm here playing house with a woman I barely know. The words stung, but Elena heard the pain underneath his anger. This was Marcus Kane at war with himself, torn between the man he'd been and the man he was trying to become. You saved my life. Maybe that was a mistake. Marcus buckled on his gun belt with practiced efficiency, transforming before her eyes from the gentle man who'd carried her from the cellar into something harder and more dangerous. In leather and denim, armed and ready for confrontation, he looked like what he was, the leader of one of America's most feared outlaw motorcycle clubs. Elena had read about the Hells Angels in newspapers, seen them portrayed in movies as criminals who lived outside society's rules. She'd never imagined she'd fall in love with one. Because that's what this was, she realized with startling clarity. Love. Impossible, dangerous love for a man whose world was built on loyalty and brotherhood that would never accept her. The Diablos won't stop, Marcus continued, checking his weapon with the automatic motions of long practice. They'll keep hitting us until someone ends this. That someone is me. And after you end it? Marcus met her eyes. There might not be an after. Elena stood, crossing the kitchen to stand in front of him. Then don't go. I have to. No, you don't. She placed her hands on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath leather and cotton. You said you bought this place to disappear. So disappear. With you? The question hung between them like a bridge she was afraid to cross. Elena thought of her life before. Her fifth-grade classroom with its bright bulletin boards and eager faces. Her small apartment with its neat kitchen and carefully tended plants. Her predictable routine of lesson plans and parent conferences. A good life. A safe life. A life that felt like a cage compared to the possibility standing in front of her. Yes, she whispered. With me. Marcus's hands came up to frame her face, his calloused palms gentle against her skin. You don't understand what you're asking. I understand that the men who kidnapped me chose your property because they thought it was empty. I understand that means they've been watching you, learning your habits. Elena's voice grew stronger as the pieces fell into place. I understand that if you go back to your club now, they'll use me to hurt you. Marcus's thumb traced her cheekbone. Smart woman. Smart enough to know that running away together is the only choice that keeps us both alive. For a moment, Elena thought she'd won. Marcus's eyes softened, and she could see him imagining it, the two of them disappearing into the vastness of America, becoming different people in a different place. New names, new lives, new chances to be better than what they'd been before. But then his phone rang again. This time the caller didn't wait for Marcus to speak. Reaper, you need to get down here now. Danny's voice was loud enough for Elena to hear, tight with barely controlled fury. They left something for you. What kind of something? The kind that makes this personal. Marcus closed his eyes, and Elena could see him making the choice that would define the rest of their lives. I'll be there. And Reaper, bring the girl. Elena's blood turned to ice. How does he know about me? Marcus was already moving, grabbing keys and pulling on his jacket with the grim efficiency of a man preparing for war. Because the Diablos told him. The pieces fell into place with horrible clarity. The kidnapping hadn't been random. Someone had known Marcus Kane was buying the Ashford house, known he'd be alone and vulnerable. They'd used Elena as bait, counting on his conscience to make him save her, counting on his growing attachment to make him vulnerable. Now the trap was closing around both of them. They wanted you to find me, Elena said. Yeah, this is all my fault. Marcus stopped and pulled her against him, his arms fierce and protective. None of this is your fault, but we're out of choices now. What do you mean? I mean the only way to keep you safe is to end this war. Marcus pressed his forehead against hers, and Elena could feel his struggle in the tension of his muscles. And the only way to end it is to be who I really am. Who you really are is the man who carried me out of that cellar. No, Elena. Marcus stepped back, and she could see him rebuilding the walls that leadership required. Who I really am is Marcus Kane, president of the Nevada Hells Angels, and presidents don't abandon their brothers. He was at the door when Elena called after him. Marcus. He turned. Don't let them turn you back into something you're trying not to be. Marcus Kane looked at her for a long moment, memorizing her face like he was afraid he'd never see it again. Too late for that, darling. I was never anything else. The door closed behind him with the finality of a coffin lid, leaving Elena alone in a Victorian house that suddenly felt more like a mausoleum than a home. Outside, she heard the rumble of his Harley coming to life, the sound growing fainter as Marcus Kane rode toward whatever fate waited for him in the ashes of his clubhouse. Elena Rodriguez, elementary school teacher from Carson City, sat in the kitchen of an abandoned Victorian house and realized that loving a Hell's Angel meant learning to live with the constant possibility of loss. Every time Marcus walked out that door, it might be the last time she saw him alive. But she also realized something else. She'd rather have one day of this dangerous, uncertain love than a lifetime of the safe, predictable existence she'd left behind. Because for the first time in her 32 years, Elena Rodriguez felt truly alive, even if that life came with the constant threat of everything ending in violence and heartbreak. Marcus found Elena's school ID badge nailed to the clubhouse door, but it wasn't the only message waiting for him. The Nevada Hells Angels headquarters had been reduced to twisted metal and ash, but the Diablos had made sure their communication survived the fire. Elena's elementary school identification hung like a trophy against charred wood, her photo smiling innocently above melted plastic. But below the badge, secured to the blackened door with railroad spikes, was something that made Marcus's blood run cold. A manila envelope marked, "For Reaper's Eyes Only," in blood-red letters. Danny stood beside Marcus, both men staring at the grotesque display. Around them, 20 Hells Angels waited for their president's orders, their faces grim with the particular anger that came from seeing their home destroyed and their brother lost. Some cleaned weapons. Others simply watched the road, expecting more violence to follow. "You want me to open it?" Danny asked. "No." Marcus pulled the envelope free, feeling the weight of photographs inside. "This is meant for me." The first photo hit him like a physical blow. Elena Rodriguez, walking out of Carson Elementary School, unaware she was being watched. The timestamp showed it was taken 3 weeks ago, long before Marcus had ever heard of her. The second photo showed her at a coffee shop, reading a book with the focused attention of someone who genuinely loved learning. The third showed her at a grocery store, selecting produce with the careful attention of someone who lived alone and planned her meals. Someone had been hunting her for weeks. But it was the fourth photograph that changed everything. Elena Rodriguez standing next to an older man in a prosecutor's suit, both of them smiling at what looked like a graduation ceremony. The back of the photo bore a handwritten note. Elena Rodriguez, adopted daughter of retired federal prosecutor Miguel Rodriguez. Ring any bells, Reaper. Marcus's hands shook as the implications crashed over him. Miguel Rodriguez, the federal prosecutor who'd sent half the Nevada chapter to federal prison in the late 1990s. The man who'd made it his personal mission to destroy outlaw motorcycle clubs, one RICO conviction at a time. The enemy who'd cost Marcus more brothers than any rival gang ever had. And Elena was his daughter. "What is it?" Danny stepped closer, reading Marcus's expression. "What's in the photos?" Marcus handed him the pictures without a word. He watched Danny's face change as he processed the information, saw the exact moment when understanding turned to betrayal. "Jesus Christ, Reaper. She's Rodriguez's daughter. Adopted daughter," Marcus corrected, though the distinction felt meaningless. "Does it matter?" And Danny's voice carried 20 years of accumulated frustration. Her old man put Spider away for 12 years. He's the reason Bones lost everything in asset forfeiture. And you've been protecting her? More photographs spilled from the envelope. Elena at a college graduation. Apparently, she had a bachelor's degree from a university Marcus had never heard of. Elena at what looked like a family barbecue, surrounded by people who looked suspiciously like federal law enforcement and their families. Elena at a charity event for families of fallen police officers, wearing a dress that probably cost more than most people made in a month. Each image felt like another knife in Marcus's back. The final item in the envelope was a letter, typed on expensive paper. Marcus Kane, President, Nevada Hells Angels. By now you've discovered who your little school teacher really is. Elena Rodriguez, adopted daughter of the man who destroyed more of your brotherhood than bullets ever have. We've been watching her for months, waiting for the right opportunity. When we learned you'd bought the Rodriguez family's old property. Oh yes, that Victorian house belonged to Miguel's biological family before they disappeared. We knew fate was giving us the perfect weapon. Did she tell you she was just an elementary teacher? Did she mention the master's degree in education? Did she happen to bring up that she spent last summer volunteering at a youth center that partners with law enforcement? We kidnapped her knowing you'd save her. We counted on your conscience, your need to be the hero. We counted on you falling for the innocent act. And it worked perfectly. Now here's our offer. Come to the old mining camp outside Carson City. Midnight. Come alone, and we'll let her live. Refuse, and we'll make sure her father understands exactly what kind of man his daughter chose over her family. Either way, this ends tonight. Victor Delacroix, President, Nevada Diablos. Marcus read the letter 3 times before the words fully registered. The Victorian house, Elena's family's original property, her advanced degree, the law enforcement connections, every moment they'd shared, every word she'd spoken, every touch that had made him believe he could be something better than what he was, all of it built on connections she'd never mentioned. She played you, Danny said quietly, played all of us. But even as Marcus's rational mind accepted the evidence, something deeper rebelled against it. He remembered Elena's eyes when he'd found her in the cellar, the genuine terror, the real gratitude. He remembered the way she'd touched his Hells Angels patch without flinching, the way she'd stood up to Danny without backing down. Either she was the greatest actress he'd ever met, or there was more to this story. I need to call her, Marcus said. Reaper. I need to hear her explain this. Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed the Victorian's landline. Elena answered on the second ring. Marcus. Her voice was shaky but relieved. Thank God. Are you all right? I heard on the news about the fire. We need to talk. Something in his tone must have warned her. What's wrong? Tell me about your father. Silence stretched across the connection. When Elena finally spoke, her voice was small and confused. My father? He died when I was 3. Car accident. Why? Your adopted father. Another pause, longer this time. How do you know about Miguel? So you admit it. Admit what? Marcus, you're scaring me. What's going on? Federal prosecutor Miguel Rodriguez, the man who's been destroying Hells Angels for 20 years. That's who raised you. Elena's voice cracked. I don't understand. Yes, Miguel Rodriguez adopted me when I was 8, but he's not a prosecutor anymore. He retired 10 years ago. He's been battling early onset dementia since then. Marcus, what does this have to do with anything? The Diablos left me photos, Elena. You and Rodriguez together. You at law enforcement events. You volunteering with police programs. Oh, God. The words came out like a prayer. Marcus, I can explain. Can you? Can you explain why you never mentioned you had connections to law enforcement? Why you never told me your adopted father was the man who's put more of my brothers in prison than anyone else? Why you didn't think that might be relevant? I didn't think it mattered. Elena's voice rose with desperation. Miguel has dementia, Marcus. He doesn't even remember what he used to do for work most days. The volunteer work, that was helping kids, not working with police. I chose teaching because I wanted to help children learn, Not because of anything Miguel did. It doesn't matter now, Marcus said finally. They want to trade you for me. Then we run, like we talked about. We disappear together. Where, Elena? Where do we run that they can't find us? Where do we hide from the fact that your father destroyed my family? Miguel Rodriguez isn't my father. Elena's voice broke with emotion. He's a sick old man who tried to give me a good life after my parents died. I chose my own path, Marcus. I chose to work with children instead of against their parents. I chose you over everything I was raised to believe about about your world. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 20 years of brotherhood pressing down on him like gravity. Around him, his brothers watched and waited for their president to make the choice that would define the Nevada Hells Angels' future. They want me to come alone to the mining camp. Midnight. Don't do it. Please, Marcus. Don't trade your life for mine. Maybe it's time, Marcus said quietly. Maybe this is how it was always going to end. No. Elena's voice was fierce with determination. I won't let you sacrifice yourself for me. I'm coming to where you are. Stay where you are. Marcus. Stay where you are, Elena. That's not a request. He hung up before she could argue and looked at Danny, who'd heard every word of the conversation. What do you think? Marcus asked. I think she's either the best liar in Nevada, or she's telling the truth. Danny lit a cigarette with hands that weren't quite steady. Question is, does it matter? Marcus studied the photographs again, trying to see past the surface to the truth underneath. Elena Rodriguez, daughter of the enemy, connected to law enforcement, involved with police programs, but also the woman who'd touched his scars like they were something beautiful. The woman who'd trusted him completely when she had every reason to be afraid. Get the boys ready, Marcus said finally. We're going to the mining camp. All of us? Marcus looked at the ruins of their clubhouse, at the place where Rico Santos had lost his life simply for being a Hell's Angel. He thought about 20 years of brotherhood, of oaths that bound men closer than blood, of the price that came with wearing the patch. And he thought about Elena Rodriguez, who might be the enemy's daughter, or might just be a woman who'd made the mistake of falling in love with the wrong man. All of us, Marcus confirmed. If I'm going to end this tonight, I'm ending it with my brothers. But as he prepared for what might be his final ride, Marcus Kane couldn't shake the feeling that the truth was bigger and more complicated than photographs could capture. Unfortunately, he was about to run out of time to figure out what that truth really was. The desert wind picked up, scattering ashes from the destroyed clubhouse like snow made of dreams and destruction. Somewhere in that wind, Marcus could hear the ghost of Rico Santos laughing, and the sound carried the weight of all the choices that had led him to this moment. Tonight, one way or another, Marcus Kane would discover if love was stronger than loyalty, if redemption was possible for men who'd built their lives on violence, if Elena Rodriguez was his salvation or his damnation. The only certainty was that by sunrise, nothing would ever be the same. Elena Rodriguez had never held a weapon with intent to use it, but desperation was a hell of a teacher. She'd hung up the phone and sat in Marcus's Victorian kitchen for exactly 3 minutes, staring at the walls that had become her sanctuary and her prison. 3 minutes to process the fact that her entire world was collapsing around the revelation of a connection she'd barely considered significant. 3 minutes to understand that the man she loved was riding toward his destruction because of who she was. Then she opened Marcus's gun safe. The combination was his Hell's Angels membership date, something he'd mentioned casually while showing her around the house, and found his backup. 38. The drive to the mining camp took 45 minutes through Nevada backroads that twisted through desert landscape like scars on the Earth's surface. Elena used every minute to think, to plan, to prepare herself for what she was about to do. She'd never been aggressive, never even argued with difficult parents during parent-teacher conferences. But tonight, she was driving toward a confrontation with a loaded weapon and determination in her heart. Because Marcus Kane was going to be hurt unless she prevented it. The mining camp appeared in her headlights like something from a nightmare. Abandoned since the silver ran out in 1989, the site was a graveyard of industrial ambition, rusted machinery, collapsed buildings, and holes in the earth that led to tunnels no one had explored in decades. The perfect place for men to settle disputes away from witnesses. Elena parked Marcus's pickup behind a boulder formation and crept closer on foot. Her teacher's sensible flat slipping on loose gravel as she navigated the treacherous terrain. The .38 felt impossibly heavy in her hands, and she had to fight every instinct that screamed at her to turn around and drive back to safety. But she'd made her choice the moment she'd answered Marcus's phone call and heard the pain in his voice. The Hell's Angels had arrived in force. Elena counted at least 30 motorcycles hidden among the rocks, their riders invisible in the shadows, but their presence unmistakable. Danny's voice carried across the camp as he coordinated positions, transforming the abandoned mine into a fortress. Southeast Ridge, cover the access road. Copy that. Visual confirmed. Remember, we get Reaper out alive. Everything else is negotiable. These weren't the mindless criminals she'd seen portrayed in movies. They moved like soldiers, communicated like professionals, prepared like men who'd done this before and expected to survive to do it again. For the first time, Elena truly understood what Marcus Kane had built in the Nevada Hell's Angels. Not just a motorcycle club, but a family willing to risk everything for each other. The Diablos had chosen their position well, using the mine's main building as cover while controlling the access roads. Elena could see at least 20 men, all heavily armed, all watching the approaches for the Hell's Angels assault they knew was coming. But they weren't watching for one desperate woman with everything to lose. Elena found Marcus in the center of it all, exactly where she'd known he would be, in the most dangerous position, drawing enemy attention to protect his brothers. He was positioned behind an overturned ore cart, a bandage visible on his left shoulder, where he'd apparently been grazed by something, returning measured fire against overwhelming odds. Even wounded, even outnumbered, he fought with the deadly precision that had made him president of the Nevada Hell's Angels. But Elena could see what his brothers couldn't. Marcus Kane was ready to end this permanently. He wasn't fighting to win. He was fighting to make his sacrifice meaningful, to buy time for his brothers to escape, to end the war through decisive action instead of prolonged conflict. Victor Delacroix was stalking him, using the chaos to close the distance for a finishing move. Elena watched the Diablos leader moving through the ruins like a predator who'd finally cornered his prey. In 30 seconds, maybe less, the man she loved would be in mortal danger. Elena had never hurt anything larger than a spider. She raised Marcus's .38, lined up the sights the way she'd seen in movies, held her breath the way her high school physics teacher had taught her to steady her hands during lab experiments, and pulled the trigger. The recoil nearly broke her wrist, and the bullet went wide, striking a piece of rusted machinery somewhere to Victor's left. But the shot was close enough to make him dive for cover and shout a warning to his men. "We got flankers. Northridge." The Diablos turned their attention toward Elena's position, their disciplined formation beginning to crack as they tried to locate this new threat. Elena fired again and again, each shot more confident than the last. She wasn't trying to hurt anyone. She was buying Marcus the opening he needed to do what Marcus Kane did better than anyone else in Nevada: end conflicts permanently. Elena watched him move like liquid precision, flanking Victor while the gang leader was distracted by the phantom threat. The two men who'd been hunting each other for years finally met in single combat among the ruins of America's industrial past. "Marcus Kane," Victor called out, his voice echoing off canyon walls. "Finally decided to face me man to man." "Been looking forward to this for 5 years," Marcus replied, stepping into the open with his weapon trained on Victor's center mass. "Before this ends, I want you to know, she knew. Your little teacher. She's been reporting to her federal contacts since the day she met you." Elena's heart stopped. Even from her position 50 yards away, she could see Marcus's face change as Victor's words hit home. "You're lying." "Am I?" "Ask her about the phone calls to her adopted daddy. Ask her about the reports she's been filing. Your Elena Rodriguez is federal law enforcement, Kane. Has been for years. The whole kidnapping was her idea." Elena watched Marcus's stance waver as doubt crept across his features. 20 years of survival instincts warred with 3 days of love, and Victor Delacroix was betting that doubt would be enough to create the opening he needed. Elena made the hardest choice of her life. She stood up from behind her cover and walked into the open. Marcus is 38, trained on Victor Delacroix's center mass. "He's lying, Marcus," she called out, her voice carrying clearly across the devastated landscape. "I've never been federal law enforcement. I've never reported to anyone. The only choice I've made since I met you is to love you." Both men turned to stare at her. Marcus with amazement, Victor with the particular rage of a man whose perfect plan had just been ruined by an amateur. "Elena, get back!" Marcus shouted. "No." Elena kept walking, kept her weapon trained on Victor, kept her voice steady despite the fact that her heart was beating so hard she could barely breathe. "I'm done hiding. I'm done letting other people fight my battles." "Touching," Victor sneered. "But it doesn't change the facts. She's Miguel Rodriguez's daughter, the enemy's family. You want to know the truth about Miguel Rodriguez?" Elena's voice rose with 24 years of suppressed frustration. "He was a broken man who tried to make up for destroying families by saving one little girl whose parents died in a car crash. He never told me what he did for work until I was 18. By then, I already knew I wanted to teach, not prosecute. I chose love over law, Mr. Delacroix. I chose Marcus over everything I was raised to believe." "Pretty speech," Victor said. "But you're still the enemy's—" Elena pulled the trigger. The bullet caught Victor Delacroix in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his weapon flying into the darkness. Around the camp, Diablos and Hell's Angels alike stopped fighting, waiting to see what would happen next. Elena walked over to where Victor lay, clutching his shoulder and trying to reach for a backup weapon. Her 38 remained trained on his chest. "I am not my father," she said quietly. "I am not my past. I am not what you thought I was. I am Elena Rodriguez, and I choose who I love." Victor tried to speak, probably to threaten some final revenge or call for backup. Elena didn't let him finish. She put another bullet in his other shoulder, ensuring he wouldn't be reaching for any more weapons tonight. When she turned around, Marcus was staring at her like he'd never seen her before. "Elena, is it over?" she asked, looking past him to where Diablos were dropping their weapons and raising their hands in surrender. "It's over." Elena nodded once and dropped the gun. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely stand, but she'd done what needed to be done. She'd chosen her future over her past, love over fear, Marcus Kane over everything she'd been taught to believe about violence and justice. And for the first time since waking up in that Victorian cellar, Elena Rodriguez felt truly free. The desert wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and freedom across the mining camp, where two people had just discovered that sometimes love required you to become someone you'd never imagined you could be. 6 months later, Elena stood in the Nevada Hells Angels clubhouse, watching Marcus teach her how to rebuild a motorcycle transmission, and marveled at how completely her life had transformed. "The key is patience," he was saying, his hands guiding hers as they worked together to align the gears in his rebuilt shovel head. "You can't force it. Metal has its own logic, its own way of fitting together. Push too hard and you'll damage something that can't be repaired." Elena smiled at his philosophy. Everything with Marcus came back to respect. Respect for machines, for brotherhood, for the desert that had shaped him into the man she loved. Even love, she'd learned, was about respect. Respecting each other's past, each other's choices, each other's scars and dreams in equal measure. The clubhouse had been rebuilt larger and more secure than before, with reinforced walls and security systems that would make federal agencies jealous. But it was also home now, in ways the old building never had been. Elena had insisted on a kitchen that could feed 30 people, a library corner where she tutored the children of Hell's Angels members, and a first aid station that could handle everything from scraped knees to more serious injuries. It wasn't the life she'd planned, but it was the life she'd chosen. Mrs. Kane. The voice belonged to Luis, age 7, whose father rode with the Tucson chapter, and whose mother had passed away in an accident the previous year. He held up a book, Charlotte's Web, with the pride of someone who'd conquered Mount Everest. I finished it. That's wonderful, Luis. Elena wiped her hands on a towel and knelt to his level, giving him the same attention she would have given any student in her former classroom. What was your favorite part? When Charlotte saved Wilbur. Even though she was just a spider, she saved his life because she loved him. Elena glanced at Marcus, who was pretending not to listen while he continued working on the transmission. Sometimes the smallest acts of love make the biggest difference. Are you going to have kids with Mr. Marcus? The question caught Elena off guard. She and Marcus had talked about children, carefully, tentatively, both of them aware that raising kids in this world would require navigating complexities that most parents never had to consider. Maybe someday, she said carefully. I hope so. You'd make good parents, and the club needs more kids around. After Luis ran off to find his father, Marcus looked up from the transmission, his hands stained with motor oil and his eyes soft with affection. Kids, huh? Apparently, the members have been discussing our family planning. What do you think? Elena considered the question seriously. Raising children in this world would mean teaching them to navigate both her values and his, education and loyalty, compassion and strength, the ability to see nuance in a black and white world. It would mean explaining why their father's friends had scars and complex histories, why some people crossed the street when they saw the Hell's Angels patch, why love sometimes required difficult choices to protect what mattered most. I think, she said slowly, that any child we raise will know how to stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves. They'll understand that family doesn't always come from blood, and that sometimes the most important choice you can make is to love someone the world tells you not to love. Marcus's smile was soft and warm, transforming his scarred face into something beautiful. Sounds about right. That evening, as they sat on the Victorians' rebuilt porch watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold, Elena thought about the price of the choices they'd made. She'd left her teaching position, difficult to explain a weeks-long absence that ended with marriage to an outlaw motorcycle club president, but she'd gained something more valuable, a sense of purpose that went beyond lesson plans and standardized tests. The Hell's Angels had embraced her completely, but acceptance came with expectations. She was the president's wife, which meant representing the club at events, mediating disputes between brothers, being strong when strength was required, and diplomatic when diplomacy could prevent conflict. The women of the club, wives and girlfriends who'd carved out lives in this complex world, had taught her what survival looked like when your family operated outside society's conventional rules. Regrets? Marcus asked, reading her mood with the accuracy of a man who'd learned to interpret her silences. No. Elena leaned against his shoulder, breathing in the scent of leather and motor oil that had become home to her. But I understand now why you tried to warn me away. This life isn't for everyone. Hell, it's not for most people. Good thing I'm not most people. Marcus's arm tightened around her. No. You're definitely not. They sat in comfortable silence as stars appeared overhead, tiny pinpoints of light in the vast Nevada sky. In the distance, Elena could hear the rumble of motorcycles, brothers returning from rides, from business, from whatever kept the club functioning in a world that would rather see them disappear entirely. Her phone buzzed with a text from her former principal. Position still open if you change your mind. The kids miss you. Elena deleted the message without responding. Some bridges, once crossed completely, were meant to stay crossed. She'd entered Marcus's world with full commitment, and there was no going back to who she'd been before that night in the cellar. The elementary school teacher who'd worried about lesson plans and parent conferences felt like someone she'd read about in a book. Real but distant, part of a life that no longer fit who she'd become. But she wouldn't want to go back, even if she could. Because Elena Rodriguez Kane had learned something about herself in the darkness of that Victorian basement. Something she'd never known in all her years of safe choices and predictable routines. She was stronger than she'd ever imagined. Strong enough to love a dangerous man. Strong enough to build a life on the margins of society. Strong enough to be the bridge between two worlds that had never understood each other. Strong enough to act decisively when action was the only way to protect what mattered most. And strong enough to create something entirely new from the ashes of everything she'd once believed about herself. "Marcus," she said quietly. "Yeah. I'm glad you bought that Victorian house. Even though it came with kidnappers in the cellar and federal prosecutors for in-laws. Especially because of that." Elena turned to look at him, this man who'd become her whole world. "If you hadn't found me that night, I'd still be living a half-life, pretending that safety was the same thing as happiness." Marcus Kane, president of the Nevada Hells Angels, the most respected man in 3 states, blushed like a teenager. "I love you too, Mrs. Kane." They went inside together as the desert claimed the darkness. 2 people who'd found salvation in the most unlikely place possible, in each other's arms, in a love that had survived secrets and violence and the weight of impossible choices. Behind them, the Victorian house settled into evening quiet, its walls now holding better memories than ghosts. The Ashford family's tragedy had been transformed into something beautiful and hopeful, proving that even the darkest places could become home when filled with the right kind of love. And somewhere in the distance, the Nevada wind carried the promise of all the tomorrows they'd build together, one choice at a time, one day at a time, one act of love at a time. If this story touched your heart, subscribe and stay for the next ride.